Welcome to Season 2 of Nuances Beyond First Impressions with the Asian Diaspora. Together, we wanted to create a safe space where everyone can learn more about our diverse communities, the complicated relationships we have with our culture, and how they intersect with feminism, queerness, disability, anti-racism, career choices, politics, and more.
I'm Ariadne Mila, a Filipino American from a small town on the southern border of Texas.
And I'm Sherilyn Lee, aka Lazu, a new American originally from the only place a dodo bird ever lived, Mauritius.
Rod Kim is an American songwriter and occasional actor based in Los Angeles, California. Some of his recent credits include the Philadelphia Phillies mascots theme song, music for the official YouTube audio library, the end credit theme for Pretty Outrageous, as well as music for the YouTube channels NerdSync, Yo Mama, and many more. In addition to songwriting and composing, Rod is a YouTuber who has collaborated with Ron Wasserman of Power Rangers, X-Men the Animated Series, Michael and Patty Silvershire of Disney's Tailspin and Gummy Bears, and Ryan Elder of Rick and Morty. Rod, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. It's great to have you.
Oh, no problem. It's always good to be on things like this because, people with our faces didn't get to say a lot when we were younger. So
yeah, for sure.
And then they gave us the internet.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about your background, your childhood growing up and how that brought you to here.
I grew up in central Indiana. I was born in a town called Kokomo. And then when I was in junior high, our family moved to a town called Greentown that was 10 miles away. I don't want to paint anything as overtly bad. It was the 90s and we were Asian. Yeah. And there were no others. It's hard to explain. That's just what it was. Whatever that entails, good and bad. So I can't say everything was terribly bad, but I'm currently in a stage of my life where I'm reclaiming that youth. There's things that could have been had there not been stuff, or I guess nuances, like you guys call yourselves. My parents wanted me to either be a doctor or a lawyer. Surprise, surprise.
As one does.
Right. Because they immigrated from Korea and it was the big American dream or whatever. And very early on when I was like 5 or 6, they discovered that I can't stand the sight of blood and I'm super bad at lying. So neither of those career paths were going to work. So then I was supposed to go to college for automotive engineering because Kokomo was at the time the world headquarters for Daimler Chrysler and GM/Delco. So everyone, if you didn't go into like more local business, you would probably go to college and then come back and be an engineer there or whatever. It made sense. It was math adjacent, like all the things that Asian parents want you to do. I graduated high school a little bit early and then went into that for a little bit. And long story short, it wasn't me. I'm thankful to my younger self for recognizing that instead of following through on what I was expected or told. And I broke my parents' hearts and went to school for music instead. So at that time, I was going to Indiana University, Kokomo, for the engineering path. I was there for a year or less. So I then left the state and then I went to Greenville, Illinois, to Greenville University for contemporary music. I loved it. Graduated there, moved to the East Coast with my college roommate to work at a sound company. I did live sound for a while. That was an interesting thing for me because I was doing live sound, but it was just like engineering in a different field. And that's great. And I think I did fine at it. But I had friends like my college roommate. He's really passionate about it. I was like, people like that should be doing this. You burn me out 1 inch and I'm just going to give up. So you need people that are really into it. I started recording my own music, mainly because the head of the music department where I went to college was like, Rod, you write great songs. You should do these things yourself. I always just wanted to be a songwriter for other people. But I also like releasing music on my own, not as a career, but just to put out there. So I started just letting go and wrote a bunch of songs with the intention of trying to pitch them to other artists. And I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but a producer named Richie Rubini found me at the time. And I just reconnected with this man recently. I love how honest, but also caring he was about it because he found me playing a music festival in Delaware. And I'll never forget this. He's forgotten this, but I'll never forget this. He was one of 3 people, including the 2 bartenders that were there at the show. And he was like, I think you're pretty great and you got great potential. The problem is you don't write good songs. But the thing is, that's a fixable thing. There's a myriad of other things that are not or less fixable. And so he worked with me. I was writing stuff, trying to pitch things. And the more I was writing, the more Richie was like, I don't think other people can cut these songs. Not in a bad way, but like, these are so specific. Who are you going to pitch these to? So that led to this song called Bye Now. That was about a love interest that didn't work out. I got a little bit of college radio airplay. So I went on a little tour. And then what really took off in the indie sense was I had a song called Tomorrow She's Mine, which started as a ballad. But Richie, the producer, was like, what if you play choppy pianos and speed it up just a little bit? And then it wasn't a ballad anymore. And it was a goofy song. Long story short, it got picked up by Rock Band 2, the video game for Xbox. And then I went on a nationwide tour. The CD, if anybody remembers what those are, was sold in Best Buy stores all across the country. I went on a tour for all of 2010, across the country 3 or 4 times in a single year. I don't ever want to say like I made it or anything because I'm still broke in Los Angeles, but I'm happy and I'm on the path that I want to be. And I'm a full-time songwriter now. Once again, not rich, but I'm paying my bills in Los Angeles. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned your parents were kind of heartbroken when you left engineering, which I think is the
Yeah.
reaction of any Asian parent.
Yeah.
So I assume they came around afterwards, right?
That's an interesting story. So you guys will probably appreciate this if you've had to break something similar to your parents. I knew it internally. I didn't know how to approach it. I just knew that I couldn't continue to exist if it was going to be on a path otherwise. I didn't know the reasons why. It took, into my 30s to figure out why that was, but I'm glad that the instinct still stuck through. But I remember the specific strategy was I'm going to break it to mom first, because both of them are going to be difficult, but mom will be a little bit more sympathetic. Mom was a little more strict, but dad was a little more scary to me. So break it to mom first. Luckily, I had my godmother, wonderful white lady in Greentown, Indiana, who was close friends with my mom. And she was like, yeah, you should at least let him give a shot at this. So that was a whole night of tears with Grandma Sue and my mom. And we hadn't even begun to hint to my dad that this was happening. Once mom was on my side, she helped me. Have you ever seen Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yes.
They're a very old school immigrant family too. So the man and the family make the decisions. And the mom was like, the man might be the head of the household, but the woman is the neck. She turns the head. And so that's the approach my mom took. And she was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I do this to your father all the time. We went out to one of those all-you-can-eat buffet places. We're going to get nice and full. We're going to be happy. We're going to talk all about stuff he likes, like church and country music. And then we're going to get him like peak mood. And then we're going to tell him, also, you're in a very public place, so no outbursts can happen. And honestly, I can't remember what the specific reaction was. This whole thing was a blur because I was so anxious about it. But it wasn't anything big or bad that I remember. Everything worked the way I was supposed to. It was at least contained because we were in public. He was happy because we were all full of stuff. And then they were both like, okay. What's funny is I'd already applied to this college and no others before even breaking into either of them. So I'd already just decided. I was like, I'm just going to not even let the possibility of someone telling me otherwise. So even if they say no, I'm just doing it. And that was what I told my mom. I was like, I don't want to be ungrateful for everything that you've done for me and my brother, but I'm going to do it and you can help or you cannot, or you could be on it right or not. I don't want to say that they were necessarily on board, but they weren't putting the brakes on anything. So that was good. What was funny too is I don't know what was going on in their head about music college, but once they moved me in and they visited a month later, and then they saw it was an actual college campus, and my mom was so surprised. She's like, "There's classrooms." I was like, "I don't know what you thought we were just sitting around in a field smoking pot and guitar or something." I don't know what's going on, but that was a little click for my mom. Then, actually, 2010, I was on tour and I was at a tour stop in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I remember I was playing. My parents visited because it was less than an hour away from them. And they were good Asian parents. They sat down, enjoyed it, politely clapped, didn't react too much and stuff. And then I was talking to them after the show because I hadn't seen them because I'd been on the road. The venue owner walked up to me and handed me an envelope with a check in it. My mom was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "It's my paycheck." She's like, "You get paid for this?" I'm like, "What do you think I've been doing for the last 10 years?" I don't want to say it was a ton of money necessarily, it's not life-changing, but it was gig money for a guy that's been on tour professionally for a year or whatever. And I opened up the check in front of her. She looked at it. She's like, "You only played for an hour." And I was like, "Yeah." "You got paid this much?" I was like, "Yeah." "We're not going to negate like the 12 hours it took to get here, let alone like going on my car, all this stuff, practicing, all these things." But yes, that changed it for her. Then I remember my dad, when the CD was in Best Buy. So 2010 was in the heat of the housing crisis, right? And so this is not a dig to any of my friends that went into engineering, but most of them got laid off around that time because not a ton of people were buying cars. I couldn't have seen into the future to know that was going to happen, but I was pretty stable at that point because I was gigging and I wasn't working in the automotive industry and I didn't own a house. So my CD was in the Best Buy near my parents' town, and it was on the bestsellers rack because it was one of the markets I was doing pretty well in because A, I knew people that worked in the store, but B, also it was my hometown. So there's proportionally more sales there. And I don't even know why my dad was there because that's not the kind of store he'd go into. So he had to needed a washing machine or a refrigerator or something. And he happened to walk past it. He called me from there, and I don't remember where I was. I just remember wherever I was, everything froze because he was in his way of saying, "Your whole life, I told you not to do this. And I'm glad you didn't listen to me because all your friends are laid off and you're touring the country and your CD's next to Linkin Park and Michael Bublé." And I was like, I'm not on the level of them. I don't want you to mistake that. But I appreciate the sentiment. Between that and being in the church bulletin when I visited town, in my dad's eyes, I made it. I remember the church bulletin too. He was like, "You're in the church bulletin." I was like, okay. All these other things. I was the first one in our family to graduate college. But the church bulletin, that's when I made it. So it took a while. They came around in their own ways. Even now, I know that they're a little anxious about it, but they're parents, so I can't fault them for that.
Yeah, I went through a similar thing, although I did go through with engineering school and did actually work as an engineer.
Oh, you did?
Before I left. Yeah, I had a computer science degree. I went to Silicon Valley, the whole thing. And then after 5 years, I was like, you know what? I can't.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So with engineering, was there a part of it you enjoyed through it, or was it always a slog?
I was always a nerd
Okay,
since I was a kid. So I was into everything. I'm one of those people who likes everything. So I was
nice.
really good in school, but I was also really creative and I loved music as long as I can remember.
hmm
So you like all these things, and one of them can surely make you a lot of money, and the other will make you a starving artist. So which one do you want to do?
That's not actually not a bad plan.
Yeah, it was definitely a great experience. I wouldn't change it at all. But I think at some point I had this crisis where I was like, I should be happy in this job because this is a job that people would die to have. And here I am feeling like, is this all my life is going to be?
So it's funny because I had a similar experience. So when I was in the engineering path, I was shadowing an engineer. Like I wasn't doing any work, but I was with the engineers in their offices to get the feel for it. And that was a great idea because that's where I discovered I didn't want to do this. Because in my head, I knew that I could eventually learn enough to do the job competently or maybe exceptionally well. Like it seemed really in the cards. Things like math and science, I'm not especially great at, but I know I can read enough and practice this enough that it's going to be fine. I didn't know if I could do music. I enjoyed albums thoroughly, but to me, it was still this mystical, I don't know how records get made, you know? And then the woman that I was shadowing, she was wonderful, but it wasn't even anything bad that happened. It was something positive on her end that showed me that this is not my world. I asked her one day, I was like, what do you do for free time? Because whenever I was around, she was there constantly. She was there like hours before I got there and hours after I left. And she's like, oh, when I get 1 or 2 free days a month and I love it because I tutor calculus. And I'm like, this is not for me. That's
That's how you know they're passionate, right?
yeah, that's great. You should be making sure a car can brake on time, not this guy. Because I'll be like, is it pass? Sure.
Yeah. Realizing that this is something that you can force yourself to do, but it doesn't feel great.
Yeah. You know, what's beautiful is I learned this in pieces over the course of time, but it wasn't until a few years ago. I was at a YouTube event and Luc Besson was promoting his movie Valerian, and there was a Q&A. My thing is, whenever you see these successful people speak about making in the arts, they always skip the middle part. I was homeless, got evicted, or got kicked out of my house, and now I won a Grammy. I'm like, what happened in between? He didn't skip a whole lot, but he did do one of those. When I was 17, I helped a friend make a short film, and then I decided that's all I could do. So I left home and told my mother I'm going to make short films, and then I made The Professional. And I was like, all right, so let's back up a little bit. What happened in the years between that? Because that's where all of us are. He put into words what I was figuring out over the course of time was, what happens in the middle is all the little decisions you make throughout that in-between time end up defining you. He was saying it's not like one day getting a big break and getting to open for Shania Twain that defines you. It's that you've been making music for 10 years on any level, that you're a professional musician. It's just, there's no official label. I guess maybe tax forms is the closest thing. But outside of that, it's the collective consciousness. Me and my friends always joke about it's whatever the newspaper writes about you if there's a horrible accident. How they describe you, that's what might define who you are. So if you're in some front page news and you were in a car accident, how do they describe you? Do they describe you like Apple engineer, or is it singer-songwriter or musician? Or that came about because one of our friends unfortunately passed away in an accident where he fell down some stairs loading up for a gig, actually. He had a day gig, but he always put his music first. So when he passed away, every publication listed folk musician, blah, blah, blah. This is a morbid way to realize it, but my everyday actions need to reflect what that obituary is going to read, right?
Yeah. You said your parents moved here from Korea. So how connected do you feel with your culture? Were you taught Korean? Did you have a Korean community where you grew up?
I'm in this tangled mess of my culture. It was one of the positive byproducts of all the social conversations the last couple of years, which huge credit to all the BLM protests, because that opened up a lot of conversations. And I even told some people I was associated with then that more conversations were going to come up and my time was going to come up. And we decided then whether we were going to remain in each other's circles or not. And to their credit, we separated that pretty quickly. But as far as being tied to my culture, growing up, language-wise, my parents didn't teach us Korean because they didn't want me and my brother to have an accent and to be made fun of. It's funny because it was helpful because English became our first language, but it's also messed up the reasoning, but also true. It was the 80s. I was born in 82, so not very forgiving in a small town. But once again, I don't think necessarily malicious, not everybody at least. It's just when an infant or a toddler encounters something for the first time and it's odd to them, they'll probably make fun of it or be curious or whatever and stuff. And I think it's culturally what was happening. But then later, I think I was in early high school or late junior high when they were trying to teach me and my brother Korean, because they're like, okay, now's the time that you're settled in this language. It was too late. I was taking German and Spanish, and so it's like, I don't have room up here for anything else. I'm also having to deal with being a teenager and also this face in central Indiana. The town I grew up in had 3,000 people population, not a big community. I literally knew everyone in town.
Did your parents speak Korean to each other?
Yes, that was a fun thing. I don't know if they've even ever figured out that me and my brother started learning what they were saying. We couldn't necessarily speak it. But it's like when parents spell words and the kid catches on, we're like, okay, if I tell them, I lose my upper hand, right? So our whole lives were like, yeah, no. But if we had to divvy it out in a percentage, I'm probably like 90% Indiana Hoosier boy. Corn husking was one of my first jobs kind of thing. And then the remaining percentage was little scattered pieces of whatever Koreanness was in my household. Because my parents had different things, the furniture or face masks, super common. Like I just associated with my winter coat. Anytime you were sick or it was jacket weather, you just wore one of those. And I think I only stopped wearing a face mask when I was a teenager just because I was being made fun of at high school. And that was probably the only reason. So then when the pandemic happened the last couple of years, they were like, you should wear this when you go out. It wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
And then I was surprised. My parents were just floored. They were like, why is this such a big deal? I think the equivalent is if you found out that wearing socks could keep other people from getting sick or dying, would you make a big deal out of it? It's not something you had to do necessarily. And not everybody does it, but it's pretty common in a lot of places. For most people, it's not that big of a deal. I know there's probably exceptions. There's probably legitimate reasons, but I would venture to say the vast majority don't have legitimate reasons other than their own pride. So things like that, I feel connected to my culture in the subtext, but I don't know a lot about Korean history or even my own family. Like I found out a lot about my family's history through my godmother because my parents are, like nothing happened before I was born. I don't know if it's just too traumatic or their parents or both, but they didn't exist. Like they just appeared out of thin air. They had me and then that was it. But I've been finding out a little more things that add more context to my parents. Anybody that's seen Turning Red or Encanto knows that any immigrants or parents or immigrant parents have a whole set of trauma they almost definitely will pass along to their kids, voluntarily or involuntarily. And I don't want to lay out my parents' laundry here, but if you just historically see things that happened in all the Koreas, especially around the 60s, 70s, and 80s, wasn't great. And they were obviously way younger when worse things were happening too. I've heard bits and pieces. I wish in that sense that I was more connected to it. I currently am trying to reconnect, but I don't want to make it sound like I'm just doing a bunch of research on Korean history or something. If you've seen Shang-Chi, the moral of the story at the end of that is you're the product of all the good and the bad things in the past and the future of your life and the present. And you don't really have a choice in that, but you have a choice in the way you assemble it. Anybody that's seen me on social media the last couple of years, it's been pretty cheesy and I'm grateful for everyone for going along on the ride. But I'm figuring out what parts of that and how I'm putting that all together because there's bad things and good things and in-betweens. But I'm not shelving it anymore. There was a long time that anybody that knew me before was just like, I'm just a good old Hoosier boy. There's a lot of truth to that, but it's not the complete truth. I didn't have the same experience as my white friends, even though we went through the same things. What's that metaphor of potatoes and eggs being in the same water? The same circumstances does completely different things. A potato softens and an egg hardens. You can't apply the same result to every person's situation, even if the situation is the same. And it's hard to get people to understand that. There's some close friends that I genuinely believe that they're as empathetic as they can be. We've been close and we've had experiences together growing up or even new friends now, but you don't know what you don't know. And so when I say this was messed up when I was a kid and I wish it was this way, they always like, well, everyone has it like that, right? I know what you mean because you're trying to relate, but no, has anyone ever mispronounced your name almost on purpose?
Always.
And the best part is my name is, depending on what you call me, Rod or Rodney, and they still just look at it and they see that it's a Kim or they see I'm Asian. They're like, they're trying to overcomplicate it to some Korean phonetic thing. I'm like, I was named after my babysitter's son in Indiana. It's literally a white guy's name. I'm trying to be more empathetic about it now because when I look back at my own history, I've done that not only to the Asian community, but also probably other different groups and communities I didn't grow up with. So I'm not successful yet, but I'm trying to be more empathetic or figure out where it's coming from when it's happening. Because like, why is this complicated for you? Let's not get into an argument right away.
Yeah.
But what is the disconnect? Because I just want to know, is it a fascination with an exotic thing in your perspective? Or are you just, I don't know, it's gone both ways. There's a sketch, it's called Where You Really From, as on YouTube from years ago. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
Because I feel like only we get it.
Yeah.
Because I showed that sketch to I don't want to say all white people, but enough that it's a common thing. Show that to them and they're like, yeah, it is weird that she's making fun of him for liking fish and chips for being historically British or whatever. I'm like, you don't see the parallel? I grew up with both Korean parents, but I don't like kimchi. And I don't know how you don't understand that.
Yeah. I remember seeing that video and that was the moment when I realized that was happening. Before, when people would ask me, I never really thought about it because I didn't grow up in the US. Mm-hmm. So I am foreign. Not from where they think I am, but yeah. But yeah, that was the first time that I was like, oh, that's what's happening.
I had a friend that is a social media creator, and they brought up something really good that's not a last resort, but a later resort for me in a conversation is to ask somebody like that, what is your objective in this conversation? If you find out where I'm from, is it because you want to connect something about a food you like, a trip you took, a conversation? Was it a dead end? Were you trying to exclude me from something? Come up with your own set of conclusions about me? Is it a shortcut to knowing who I am or whatever? Because not all of those are legit or good reasons, but at least they're reasons. Okay, you just want to talk about this Korean barbecue place you went to. We can talk about that. I don't like going to them because I'm vegetarian, but we can talk about it. There's a bunch of my friends talk about it.
I think a lot of them are just looking for easy conversation starters, but I think the way it is asked makes a big difference. But if they're asking in a way where you can tell they want an Asian country as a response, that is annoying.
Yeah.
You know, that says you're exotic and I want to know how exotic. And then that just gets weird.
I feel like you both probably have a different flipped experience from me with it too, because Asian women tend to get fetishized. That's a card that's usually not in my deck of possibilities. And that's weird to me. And I feel bad about that. That's gross.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about what stereotypes have you faced and how has you being male affected that? I know some guys have said they were discriminated against. Girls didn't want to go out with them because they're Asian. So how has that been for you? And has it changed?
It's definitely changed. It's been a mixed bag. I want to say it probably follows the timeline of decades the way you think it does. I made a video on my band's channel years ago called Asian Men Are Unattractive. It's both a clickbaity title, but also not. It's not about what you think it is, but I address that stereotype because Asian men and women tend to be on the opposite ends of Western culture, attractiveness or whatever. Asian women are over fetishized most times, and then Asian men are usually at the bottom of the masculine hierarchy. I wish I had more awareness when I was younger to honestly say that I noticed one way or another, but I do know that I was always like my friend's girlfriend's friend. I dated a little bit, but not nearly as much as any of my friends. Part to do with my parents, but also part just options. I definitely don't think I had the same advantages as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed quarterback at my high school. I'll put it that way. I'm probably pretty confident in that sense. I was in show choir and I was an Asian guy, the only one in my school system until my little brother came in, but he's 5 years younger than me. So we never overlapped in the school systems. By the time I went to college, he was entering high school. Granted, I want to think that I primed it for him, but my brother Peter, he's way cooler than I am. So he's just a popular kid. So maybe it was a bit of both. Maybe as people were used to it by then, but then also he's a lot more outgoing. He's an extrovert. Getting older, it was a weird mix because even though it's not common for Asian men to be fetishized necessarily, there were a few times that I think that was the case. And it wasn't necessarily bad. Like, I don't feel like I was mistreated necessarily, but that was definitely the attraction. And it was weird for me. I don't even say bad or good because I just wasn't used to something I wasn't in control of. It's like, oh, you're Korean? Actually, I'm Hoosier, but sure, let's let this work out. We're mutually benefiting from this. But I'm glad that you call your podcast Nuances because this is what's not easy to put in a 30-second TikTok or even a 10-minute YouTube video or whatever. The nuances, it's very rare for someone to be burning crosses in your lawn anymore. Growing up, I didn't even have a little bit of that because in Indiana, Elkhart is the Klan capital of the area, at least, or if not the country and stuff. So I came across it, I want to say every day, but when you're that close to something, it happens. It's adjacent. So that doesn't happen anymore, but it's little things.
I think a lot of people, especially white people, but most people think the definition of racism is they enslave you or they burn you on a cross or the physically violent incidents, whereas racism really is a system, not isolated incidents. And I think a lot of us are learning that later in life, myself included. So did you have a point where you made that switch, where you realized that it's more of a systemic thing than individual actions or individual anecdotes?
A huge chunk of it was very gradually through my 30s, I would say, especially my late 30s. I'm 40 now. And then it's not too much of a surprise, but one big jump was June of 2020, BLM protests. The Black population of America usually always leads the way for every other minorities conversation. It's just like a credit where credit's due. And so to me, the sign was like, oh, we're opening this book now. I don't know where my chapter is, what order it's coming up, but it's coming up. It just got me thinking that context. And then the second big jump in the progress of that was the Atlanta spa stuff happened. I expected to feel something about it because of the context of it, but I was surprised how I know triggered is used a lot now, but this is in the true sense because it connected directly with something that happened when I was like 7 or 8 years old. That was a worse fear moment that I just hadn't thought about. And then I grew up and I was like, all right, that didn't happen. So everything's good. And then it happened. And all of a sudden it was real. And I was like, all right, everything has to be rethought. Those were the more darker situations that led to thinking that way. I do remember two super positive moments that helped get that thinking. I didn't know what I was missing or what people like us were missing out on. And funny, they're both movies. So in LA, there's a lot of test screenings for movies, months, sometimes years before they come out. And I happened to be at a test screening for Crazy Rich Asians. It's easy to see now how it's so great. But imagine at a time, it's 6 or 7 months before the movie comes out. And there's never been an Asian American rom-com or Joy Luck Club, I guess. But not like that. Not in the Nora Ephron, When Harry Met Sally kind of way or whatever. And especially not in our current modern era. And so I saw it. And then maybe this is the older millennial in me or whatever. But I have an 8-year-old niece. So I'm watching this movie, and me growing up, I think Margaret Cho was the only person I could parallel with. And that wasn't even that close because she's a comedian and she was much older than me. I loved everything she does, still love everything she does. But it was literally just our ethnicity that connected us and that she was in entertainment. She wasn't doing music at the time. And so I was watching Crazy Rich Asians in this test screening, and I'm seeing Gemma Chan, Awkwafina, and Constance Wu. And I'm like, my niece is going to grow up. And even if this is the only movie from here on out, there's literally a dozen or more really varying personalities of Asian or mixed Asian women that she can look up to that look like her. And I left the theater crying and then broken because I signed a paper saying that I couldn't talk about it for 8 months. It was like, you guys don't know what's coming. And then the second thing was another movie, actually. There's a movie called Blinded by the Light, which you haven't seen. Highly recommend. It's about a Pakistani kid in London in the 80s. So different continent, but still Western culture, and different decade, but only 1 decade off from me. And just dealing with kind of the similar types of racism that I grew up with. This is one violent thing that happened to us. So there's a scene in the movie where his house gets egged and peed on. That happened to our family in Indiana in the 80s, I think, or in the early 90s. Not common, but it happened. So I remember seeing that. And then the movie's about the day he discovers the music of Bruce Springsteen, and it just washes over him. And it both relates because Bruce Springsteen is arguably one of the most American musicians ever, but at the same time, he writes really classic music. So it connected and opened up this world for this mixed culture kid, specifically an Asian kid. I was just a mess during that screening. And I was like, I didn't know this was possible. They made a movie about me. Why couldn't this always happen? And this was Warner Brothers. It wasn't some small indie film. And it was also blessed by Bruce Springsteen. The best thing is Bruce doesn't appear in it. It's not a movie about him. His music is literally the soundtrack and the emotional support of it. You can tell Asian people made this movie because the big name in the movie was Haley Atwell, beautiful Caucasian woman or whatever. It would have been so easy to make her the hero of the story because she's the main character's teacher. One of the plot points is she enters one of his writing pieces into a contest and he wins. So at the end of the movie, I remember sitting there in the theater. I was like, you know what? This was great. And so when they mess it up here, it's still going to be fine. But they didn't. They nailed the landing because the parents were like, thank you for entering our son into this contest and helping with all of this. And she was only there for 2 seconds. She was like, I didn't do any of this work. He's the one that did everything. And then she leaves the frame. I'm like, was it that hard? She took credit for the part of the story she was in. But yes, his work carried the circumstances of the movie. So anyway, all that to say, I saw those two movies within a year, I think, of each other. And I was just like, it could be so much better. It could be so much better. And it's not that hard and it doesn't break the system. I don't think Blinded by the Light did extraordinary numbers, but I don't think it did bad. Obviously, Crazy Rich Asians had an impact. I'm seeing that now. Freaking Constance Wu is the new Daphne in the Scooby-Doo series coming up. I love it. All that being said, I feel like I'm still squarely in the middle of this whole unlearning and realization because even now some people will call me out on something. They're like, that was kind of messed up. I'm like, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to fix that just yet, but it's a process.
I think as long as we're willing to own up to our mistakes and just say, oh, I see now how that is problematic. I'm sorry I said that. Is that really that hard? I don't know why people make such a big deal out of it when they get called out sometimes.
It's main character syndrome. They look at themselves as the good guy and the Disney princess in their story. And so when they're called out for something where they offended somebody or they hurt somebody, it's this cognitive dissonance in their brain. They're like, oh, I can't. I'm not the bad guy. And
I'm Captain
I think
America.
That's really difficult for them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that because there's been a lot of instances where I'll tell a white friend, oh, just don't say that. That bothers me. It's not you ruined my world. It's just information. And then it destroys their week, but not in a way of fixing anything. It's just, why would you say that? How could you do that? Yeah. I was like, I'm trying to help this relationship. If I didn't care, I would just not talk to you again.
In Asian cultures, a lot of times men are taught to be stoic and never get upset about anything. Do you feel more pressure as a male to not speak up when people do things that upset you or hurt your feelings?
It's so funny you say that. Opposite from being overly feminine, Asian men have this stereotype of being stoic. I don't get that. I'm a mess. Yeah, stoicism can be a really negative stereotype because it's all the time. As far as living in Asian culture as a man, I don't want to dig at my dad because he's gotten a lot better since, but I remember him saying like, boys don't cry. and you always have to be in charge of a situation. And I was like, this guy should not be in charge of anything. I'll do my best in situations, but there are people far more qualified to be in charge of any given topic. And I think that's how we bring out the worst in people, not just me. And when we talk about a lot of culture, whether it's people being unhappy with their jobs, violent people, even incel culture, toxic fanboys and internet trolls. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to sound like a professional at this, but I feel like there's a good portion of it that has to do with people just repressing the actual person that they are because there's a social expectation.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah. So I definitely know growing up, there was a lot of stuff I just didn't vocalize because I knew it would be too much trouble to try to explain my way through or talk through, which sucks because that's the point of being a kid, right? Is like figuring yourself out. And then hopefully the adults around you are helping facilitate that. I know that now. So I'm trying to be conscious of that with my niece as she's growing up. I've talked to my brother about it and we're both like preparing. I think the greatest error any parent, but especially Asian American parents, is to have a path planned out for their kids in their head and not have any wiggle room for, not just wiggle room, anything can be possible, right? Because they're a person, they're not a robot.
Yeah.
And so whatever my niece ends up doing at whatever stage in her life, I need to be in her top tier fans and just be there facilitated, barring any moral thing. And there's stuff that I'm not going to be aware of because I do YouTube, and that's a concept that I don't think you could explain to my parents in 1982 what that would have been. Because even now, my mom, I think she's understanding a little bit more because she's discovered Korean cooking videos on YouTube. But before, I remember when I was like a couple of years into it and we were starting to make some traction. At first, she started telling her friends that I was on TV, and I was like, that is not the case. But then YouTube did grow to the point where, depending on who you're talking to, that's not a bad equivalent. And then, this kind of connects to an earlier question you had. This was another like my son made it moment for my mom. I was visiting home 2 summers ago. I was telling them about how I wrote music for the YouTube audio library. YouTube commissions various musicians to write music for their royalty-free audio library. So they pay us a lump sum to just own all the rights. And then anybody on YouTube can use your music for your videos. I don't think she was quite getting it. She understood I wrote music, but I was like, it's not for a specific show. We're just putting it somewhere. We are getting paid. And she was like, I don't know anything about YouTube except these videos. And she pulled up some Korean cooking videos, this lady making some Korean dish. And I was like, I wrote that song. Like, what?
That's amazing.
It's like, yeah, click down. And luckily, YouTube is international, right? So when she's watching a Korean video, it's in Korean. So she clicks in the description, and because YouTube automatically identifies music you're using, there it was. And she was like, you made it. Like, like I knew it all along.
That's a pretty awesome full circle moment.
Yeah.
There's been a bunch of those. I don't know what the audience for this podcast is, but if there's especially any younger, non-mainstream group of people, be open to advice, but stick to your guns. It's like if it just does not sit well in your gut, explore that. I don't want to say go with your gut because God, if I went with my gut as a teenager, I'd be in a lot of trouble. But you'll start figuring out like what is your core you? What are other influences? And I wish I would have known that as a kid.
Yeah, for sure. You talked a little bit about the movies that you went to see and you saw yourself represented. What would you hope that the Asian American community will achieve in the next couple of decades in terms of representation?
Ooh, so this is a two-sided thing. So on the side of the audiences, it's changing now, and I'm glad it is. But when I was growing up in the 90s, the Asian American audience wasn't helping. So in general, the Asian American community wasn't showing up for Asian representation. Margaret Cho, even though she was one of the few out there in entertainment for us, she had this sitcom. It was the Asian answer to Friends at the time. I think they were trying to make it that. And you can watch her stand up about how horrifically that went. Granted, there was a lot of problems from non-Asian people in that, but in general, the Asian community just wasn't showing up for that show because they didn't like her, the Asian American girl, being portrayed as a teenage girl. I don't know how else to explain it. They thought she was too ditzy. She should be smarter. She should be superior. She should play violin. So I think that's the fault on that side. It's been getting better lately. In LA, there's a thing called Gold House. They literally show up to all the AAPI-led films. They had a gold open for Shang-Chi and Crazy Rich Asians. But on the other side of that, with representation, I just want to see like be more level. I know that there's a lot of a certain type of people. They're like, why is Ariel got to be black? Why is Superman's son got to be gay? And it's like, this is the world we live in. Why not? You already have 99% of the market.
Yeah.
What does it matter? It's just to be more realistic in sense of number of representation. See, the thing that we understand is doing a new version doesn't take away the one that already exists. We already have it. So you can have whatever you make in the future. I wish more people could understand that. Because currently we're talking about Ariel being black, but by the time this podcast comes out, it's going to be another situation like that. Whatever happens now with representation of retro material doesn't change the thing that already existed. Yeah. So this doesn't matter. Also, Halle Bailey, she used to be a YouTuber. Anybody that's seen 10 minutes of her content knows she was perfect for that role, despite of anything else. She's it.
Yeah, and I think the mindset that they're coming from is that if you get something, then you're taking away something from
Yeah.
me. When in fact, it's not. It's you're getting something and you already had it. We're adding to the pie. We're not taking away from your pie.
Yeah, that's totally true. Or I've heard people make the example of adding more chairs to the table. And so I'm not taking your chair, I'm just pulling mine up.
Yeah.
So obviously more of us, but then also just the correct one. One of the reasons I think that Margaret Cho's All American Girl sitcom didn't quite hit with the general audiences is because it was trying to make fun of the family, which granted, there are things to make fun of, but it just made it more of the butt of the joke and more exotic or whatever. When Fresh Off the Boat came out, I remember the first episode, I was like, this is it. This is how it should be, because it was making fun of all the reactions to everyone, to the family moving into town. I've never had a more relatable moment on sitcoms at that time until the main character, Eddie, was sitting outside his house while the movers were moving stuff in. And then Honey, the neighbor, came by and she's, what is your name? Talking loud and slowly. And he's like, it's Eddie. And she didn't know how to react. She was like mentally preparing for some 12-syllable exotic thing. And here's this kid who listens to 90s rap and he's just a kid. So more of and more realistic, but it doesn't have to be taking over. Not every movie has to be Shang-Chi or Crazy Rich Asians, but I like it now because there are communities that exist like that. Those are reflective of actual things that exist, but also the pendulum can only be held back on the other side for so long before it needs to be on the other side for a little while before things balance out stuff.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you are censoring yourself a little bit with your white friends? Do you feel like you have to hold back, or do you feel pretty open to actually have a discussion with them?
I know this is a generic answer, but it depends. But for the most part, yes.
To hold back?
How do I put this? It's either because I now understand, and this has only been within the last couple of years. I don't want to sound like I've been like this my whole life, or literally just in the last year and a half, 2 years. I realized that there's usually boundaries to relationships. I think we have this weird misconception that we should be 1,000% open with everybody, and quickly learning that's not the case. There's a friend that I've known for many years, white friend, love the dude. And I know that in his heart of hearts, he has the best intentions. He just doesn't have any experience or willingness to expand the experience. And so shortly after all the protests, I was basically saying, you know what? I don't want to have my neighborhood destroyed, but if it happens, I get it. I'm not saying it's right, but I get it. How long do you get treated like this until you have to yell? So I'll be mad, but not at them. Does that make any sense? And I get it. And also, I can't say that I would act differently. I don't know. I don't know when you're in that moment or not. And they were like, this whole thing's just so overblown. You know who were the real oppressed people in the United States and nobody talks about that has it worse than everybody else is white redheaded people. Gingers are the worst. And he said it with a straight face. This was not an exaggeration or anything. And I know that in his head, he had the backup for it. And I was like, I'm not trying to argue someone's oppression over another. And I'm not saying that that's not even remotely true. I don't want to pretend I know the ginger experience. There's probably some truth to that or whatever. But why does that have to be combative? So at that time, I realized, okay, so I guess censoring might be one way to put it. But also I was like, we're only going to talk about comic books and Marvel movies now. And that is also slowly getting out of our conversation because of the way the Marvel movies are going, which is a good thing to me because I like that we've learned that superheroes aren't only American. So that's cool. But then there's some friends that I'm just open about.
What makes a good ally for you?
Oh, during the events of the Atlanta spa shootings, the thing that kind of broke me, besides seeing the story, was Amber Ruffin, Black woman. She still writes and is part of Seth Meyers' show, but she has her own show now, the Amber Ruffin Show. She has a clip that she put out that day. I'm just getting teary thinking about it. She actually went through Asian American history in the United States. And I learned more in that 5 minutes than I did in 12 years of school in America about my own culture here in this country, not Asian culture, Asians in America. She went through like Chinese folk in California in previous decades. And so she educated me a little bit. But then at the end, she looked dead in the camera and was like, I remember last June when people were showing up for us and I want that feeling for you. You are loved. We're here for you. And I was like, oh my God, this is this is it. And so that's on the zoomed out level. I think in the zoomed in level, I actively try to put this out there. So obviously I'm on social media. Like racist comments are just part of, it's not right, but it's there. So I don't put everything on blast because it'd just be exhausting. And I don't want that to be the center of my existence. But every so often I like put something out on social media, like I highlight something just to remind people it's there. And my whole thing is I always put at the end of the messages, I'm fine because A, I've grown up with this, and B, I know what I signed up for. I'm online and this is just some stranger. And for all I know, maybe a kid who doesn't know better. But this person exists in someone's community. So when you come across this in your circle, getting drinks or you're at school or whatever, and someone in your real life says something like that, don't tolerate it. To me, that's the best. Shut that down. My friend Ruth Ann, Caucasian woman, we were in a group where it was me, her, and then a bunch of white dudes. At the time, all close friends. And I had always noticed, but I just stopped bringing it up because no one would listen to me, that my 2 cents about anything never mattered because they would always cut me off, but they would never cut each other off. I brought it up twice and they were always like, no, that's what we do to everybody. But then she was there with us and she saw it in real time. She just saw like it happening. She saw that I couldn't get 2 words of a sentence out over something before someone interrupted it, but they wouldn't do it to each other. And so she kind of used the little bit of privilege she had. And she was like, guys, Rod's been trying to say something for 20 minutes now. Like, that meant a lot to me. I didn't realize that's what I needed at the time. Long story short, most of us aren't friends anymore, but me and Rue are super tight. She's awesome. You know, like
More people like her.
because it took that person that's in the middle ground, you know, she knows what it's like. She's a woman in LA. I've walked down Hollywood Boulevard with her. It's terrifying, but she has the attention of these white dudes. So she can say things that they'll listen to that they won't from me. I think that's nice. Brie Larson's very similar when she noticed for Captain Marvel. And this is also why she lost a lot of fanboys. She noticed that on the press junkets, it was generally white men, straight white men doing interviews for her. And she either set a stipulation or requested there be more people of color interviewing her. And I think she's gone out to say she knows that as a blonde haired white lady that she has that leverage. That's great. So to me, it's use the leverage you have in the right way and good start. I don't know if that's that's definitely not the complete picture. But to me, I like seeing that.
Is there something that you have wanted to say to a friend but didn't have the heart or the energy to tell them?
Oh, I always have things I don't have the energy to tell people. It's a good question. I'll say this just because it's the most recent, because I literally was just talking to somebody and they're another person of color, not Asian, but another person of color. They just kept telling me it's not that different for other people. And I was like, I know you're well-intentioned because we got each other's backs always. We've been in the thick of things, but also I don't know if you understand the way you're saying that, how invalidating kind of brushing off things are. Because I'm not trying to describe a situation to you in a sense that I'm super special. I'm just trying to communicate as a friend for you to say, well, everybody deals with that. Then why am I telling you? For example, in the music world, this is not speaking to my previous musical partner or anything. It's just the situation we were in. I was paired up with a Caucasian guy in this music project. And generally in settings, people would assume that he's the musician and I was always the business guy. And the truth of it, everything was pretty spread across the board because both of us are musicians and neither of us had very much of an idea of what we were doing business-wise. We were cobbling it together the best we could, to the point where even like a close friend or two would introduce us as, blah, 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 the musician, and blah, blah, the organized one. I would say something like, yeah, I've always been introduced as the business organizer, marketing person, whatever. And it's not particularly one of my strong suits. I don't think it's accurate. And they're like, well, everybody gets misconstrued like that, right? I'm like, I think I know what you mean, but you don't know what I mean. This is different. I do songwriting for a lot of other projects now. Right now, I'm doing a bunch of different shows. And there was one project I was doing music for, and they had hired me through a recommendation from someone else. They meant it as a compliment. And I know it came from a good place, but it also got me self-conscious. They were like, oh, you were way more creative than we had anticipated based on how you were pitched to us. I was like, how was I pitched to you? They're like, well, they just said that you would have all your metadata and your organizational stuff put together because. And I was like, because. And I was like, all right, I know what you mean. But all that to say, I was a little bit offended that they were surprised I could do the thing they hired me for, like music, because they thought that the other like Asian stereotype stuff was at the forefront. And they're like, oh yeah, you delivered way more than we thought. I was like, okay, I know that was a compliment and I'm getting hired again, but nah, that's a messed up assumption. So I guess I'll say 2 things. I don't love the stereotype, but also stop telling me that it's not that different.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'll change that in a few years. But right now, it's really annoying. Because I think that's what resonated most. When you said like something I don't have the heart or energy to tell someone, this whole conversation, I didn't really tell them. I told them that, but I didn't be like, stop it.
Yeah, because then you got to have the energy to explain it to them and deal with their fragility and deal with their emotions. And it's not your job.
Yeah, and that's another kind of assumption is if you assert any sort of boundaries or communication like that, you come across as the angry Asian or angry immigrant, right? Whoa, overreacting. I was like, you pushed me to, have you guys seen Get Out? So the main character, this black man's dating this white girl who ends up baiting him into this horrible situation and stuff. So the whole movie, this guy has literally had the worst day that anyone could ever imagine. They try to cut into his head and murder him, implant his brain in somebody else and stuff. Anybody in that situation, no matter who you are, you're just trying to survive. And then at the very end of the movie, he finally pins his, I'm assuming ex at that point, his white girl down to the ground because he finally has her to try to escape or whatever. And he pins her down on the ground and then the police show up. And I know everybody at that moment is like, this is reflective of real life where you push someone like that all the way to the brink and then you only turn the camera on at the moment they snap. And you're like, see how crazy they are?
Yeah.
And I don't want to equate our experience to the black experience because I know that's a whole other thing. But there are like shades of that in our community. We get pushed to this thing and then they turn the camera on. They're like, look how crazy Rod's being. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I get this example with on my song Worthy, there's a gal named Marvelous She that I did the song with. Me and her have this conversation about how we always have to yell about fire. And it's kind of a joke, but then it happened for real. I was at an event where we were checking in and there was one of those outdoor heaters above the check-in table and it had caught on fire. Not a big one, but I could see the flame had left the enclosure and was getting on the top. So I remember looking at the check-in table. I was the next one up. And I was like, hey guys, your heater's on fire. And they barely looked up and they're like, okay, just wait your turn. I'm like, I'm not talking about me. I'm saying the thing above your head is on fire. And they're like, just wait a second and we'll talk to you in a minute. I'm like, fire. And they're like, just be quiet and calm down. I'm not even raising my voice just yet. So then the thing actually hit the breaking point where the whole top caught on fire. And I was like, guys, the thing's on fire. It's right above your head. They're like, whoa, what's the overreaction, man? And I was like, I've been trying for the last 3 minutes to tell you that this thing is on fire. And I called Marvelous She after that. I was like, it happened. It happened. I was literally trying to tell them about a fire and no one was listening. Finally, when one of the guys turned around, like, oh my God, it's on fire. What were you overreacting for? I was like, next time, I'm just going to let you burn. That's just the...
And then they'll say, Rod is such a heartless man.
Right.
Yeah. There's no winning.
You mentioned they had very low expectations of you, even though they hired you. I've had very similar experiences, and I'm sure, Ari, you probably had similar experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually why I learned to produce.
Yeah. So what's funny is like, I'm not actually really a producer. I pick and choose when I correct people with that. I'm very much a songwriter, and that's old thinking because I know a lot of people have to be both now. To me, it's a little bit more of a gender gap of expectations. So many more people would expect me to be a producer versus you just because for genders. And I'm like, I would probably pass people off to you to produce before I would take the gig if the budget allowed, because most of my stuff is I write in a demo and then we send it to a producer to work on. But I'm not up on my software, my gear and all that stuff. I have a lot of producer friends that are much better, more talented, more efficient and faster than I am that should be doing it. But I love the writing part and I feel like I excel at that part. It's funny because I always assumed that being a songwriter would have been easier to be accepted because it was more of a background thing, but it still is a little weird. They're like, oh, you wrote this? And yes. What were you expecting? Like chopsticks or something? Like, I don't know what you like. I actually don't know what the expectation was. If it was like a racial thing or just it wasn't going to be as good or if it was, I don't know. You
wanted K-pop. Come on.
Yeah.
So it's funny. My cousin actually dances with BTS. So it is in our family, but you have to be much prettier than me to be in one of those groups. Min Sung is a very pretty man. And he's also much more coordinated and has much more muscle awareness than I do. But even with K-pop, it's funny because they're trying to do so much like American stuff. It's just a weird cycle of content because a lot of K-pop stuff is hip-hop.
But that's been forever, though. I think the first time I was exposed to K-pop was in maybe 2007 or so. And they sounded like American pop, except in Korean. So I think they've always been influenced by the US, but it's only now that they've been able to cross the ocean and actually have an audience in this market.
I love it because some of the old pop music in Korea from the 90s is resurfacing now. I remember when I was a kid, my aunt would send me CDs from Korea of Korean pop musicians. And I don't even know if they were popular because once again, it was my aunt. She's my dad's age. The CDs I got were either techno rap pop or real schmaltzy ballads, like the kinds in K-dramas. And I don't know what they were saying, but the vibe I was getting is meatloaf type stuff. Like I would live and die for you. And so I just knew all these ballads. There was one gal, Lee Jae-young. I remember her CD because there was a couple songs on there that were really hooky. And I was talking with a friend about her the other day. I was like, I wonder what she's up to now. And I looked her up. She's back. Her album is literally called The Return of Lee Jae-young. And she did a remake of the song that I liked from the 90s.
Oh, wow.
As part of me believes that BTS and Blackpink and stuff ushered that resurgence in, right? That's kind of like Shania Twain coming out of retirement, right? It's like when music comes back, it's like, oh, let's brush this off and try it again. So that's both a blessing and a curse because it's cool that like when I was growing up, Koreans were the lowest in the hierarchy of understood Asians. I feel like everyone was assumed to be Chinese. And then if you weren't, they just thought you were Japanese and then other. So when you said Korean, it was like you were speaking alien language to them. They're like, what is that? And now Korean popular culture is such a zeitgeisty thing internationally. But at the same time, it's also stigmatizing as that's the only thing we can be as boy bands or girl groups. I'm a messy singer-songwriter. Like it would be great to have a Korean, Chinese, or Japanese, or Vietnamese Bruce Springsteen one of these days. A really rough and tough singer-songwriter from the working class. I'm still waiting for like a Japanese country star. It feels like it has to be there because most people in America don't know how big country music is in Japan.
I didn't know that. I knew jazz was big. I didn't know country.
Jazz, yeah. But even just my dad growing up in the 90s, he defected from North Korea as a kid and then grew up in South Korea. So he's Korean as it gets, but he loved the American dream idea because he loved speed up pickup truck and listening to Shania Twain and Garth Brooks on blast when I was a kid. Most confusing thing for people in that town to see. But that's him living his truth. He's the reason that Shania Twain is part of my childhood zeitgeist. Whether I like the songs or not, she's just there. She's part of my history. So there are things in the culture that could sway preferences one way or another, but it's not a rule. At the end of the day, you're the person you are, regardless of whatever other things that you don't have a choice in.
Yeah, and that's my hope too, that we can get past the, oh, if you're Asian, then you must be this and this, or you must this and this. There's so many of us who don't fit that box. Probably most of us don't fit any of those boxes. So yeah, love to see that.
Have you been watching Cobra Kai at all? A friend asked me on social media, did you find it problematic that the only Asian kid in it is a bully? And I'm like, I'm not saying it's good or bad. If I had to really nitpick at it, I think it's cool that there's a role like that because sure, why not? The greater discussion is, how is there a whole teenage soap opera drama about karate professionals in Los Angeles and they're all white? Hundreds of kids in the high school. Not to say that's a stereotypical, like that they should all be Asian or anything, but literally Ralph Macchio, Johnny Lawrence, they run the dojos and all the kids are like white students. There's a few other non-white students, but there's very, 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 very few AAPI representation in that thing. It's just funny to me because it's not even like in Nebraska or something. It's in Los Angeles where there is a very high concentration of an Asian community in the martial arts. And not even saying it's problematic. It's just that's my suspension of disbelief is that somehow you're in Los Angeles and have hardly any Asian kids in your whole karate city beef or whatever. That's hilarious. But sure, let's let a couple bullies be Asian American kids. I love that Spider-Man's best friend, Ned, is Asian. Granted, it's a baby step because he's still the fat, funny friend. But in recent history, the last time someone that close to the star was Ned, you know? So we're inching way up. But let's skip the baby steps now. Let's just take those big swings.
Yeah, it would be nice to see a character who their Asian identity isn't the entire plot arc. And there's some films like the To All the Boys I've Loved Before films, the main character, she's Asian, but she has a whole separate story. It's not the center of her plot. It's part of her identity, but it's not her entire identity.
That's a good point. I think before moving to Los Angeles, I probably would have said, I want to see more of us on screen. I think now if I had a priority, all of it is obviously important, but I think the writer's room and the behind the scenes is first priority. Because I have some white friends that had once said, oh, they should just be stories that anybody could do. And then it just happens to be Asian. I'm like, you're close, but not quite, because it shouldn't revolve around their ethnicity, but it still affects you. So how you're going to get that nuance is having people who have lived those experiences write the stories and produce the stories. Hence why Shang-Chi and Crazy Rich Asians have those little bits. I'm granted those are very Asian movies, but Blinded by the Light, he wasn't defined by his Pakistani heritage, but he was affected by it because his parents were. And even if you're so far removed, like my niece is going to be 2 or 3 times removed from her Korean grandparents. But there's going to be things that come up that she will deal with or go through or experience that me and my brother even didn't really think of. And if there's a storyteller out there, it should be someone like her to tell that story, you know? And then she can say, I can't say what movie it is because it hasn't come out yet. And signed an NDA for it. But in general, there was this situation with this Asian family and they asked us what were the most connecting moments for us. It was about an Asian American family. Almost unanimously, all of us that were either AAPI or adjacent said, oh, there was a scene that I wish there was more of where the mom comes home after working late and makes soup for both her and her son. They don't even say what kind of soup. So you could assume it's a stereotypical like miso, or it could have just been chicken noodle. We don't know, living in America. And the story wasn't around them being Asian. They just happen to be an Asian family. But the son is starting to eat and he's communicated before in the movie that he doesn't like things overly salty. And the mom salts her food and then just reaches over and salts his without asking while he's eating it. And we were all like, that, you told 30 minutes worth of story in about 3 seconds. Because that's all our moms. And I don't know if that's specifically an Asian thing or an immigrant thing, or whatever, but it still resonates with us because all our moms think they know better for us. They don't ask us. It's not a malicious thing. They just, no matter how many times we tell them we don't like salty food, they're like, no, you do. You know, like little things like that. It shouldn't center around their ethnicity necessarily unless the story needs to. But it's cool to see those small details where you can see it does affect you.
Yeah.
I do like to see the culture be a part of their character, but not in the stereotypical way. Because I think most of us, there's a lot of stereotypically Asian things that happen in our households that don't happen in white households. And I want to see that. But then I also want to see us portrayed as not necessarily the nerdy kid, even though I am one. But, you know, portray us as musicians, as cool kids, as actors, whatever. We're not all doctors and lawyers. I think we're getting closer, but I agree with you. Skip the baby steps. All right, so we'll do the last segment of our show, which is the rapid fire questions. 1 word or 1 phrase answers, and you don't have to explain anything, but...
For sure.
All right, what's an Asian food that you'll never get tired of?
Most of the noodles, udon or ramen or whatever, like good stuff, not the cheap package stuff.
That's a popular answer.
Yeah.
I think because most of the time it sounds good, especially if I'm high or drunk.
What is an Asian food that you should like but don't?
kimchi. Everybody assumes, this is my gripe with the Korean community. If I had $1 for every time a Korean girl told me, oh, I'm revoking your Korean card, I'm like, I didn't want it. I don't want the Korean card. I don't want the kimchi, if that's what it takes, because I don't like it. I don't like the taste, and I have trauma from my mom's kimchi fridge in the garage.
What is your mother tongue, and what other languages do you speak, if any?
Yeah, just English. There was a bit in high school where I spoke a little bit of German because I briefly dated a German girl, and I took the class to impress her. I kind of understand Korean. I can recognize it when it's around, but I couldn't translate or be fluent in anything.
Yeah. Your favorite YouTube video that you've been a part of?
I was one of the victims of a Jimmy Kimmel prank where we were on the Oscars. Me and some friends were going to a screening. We thought it was a screening of Wrinkle in Time. And I was going because I was excited that there was a new Sade song in it. They interrupted the movie, and virtually every A-list actor in Hollywood came in that time. And if you watch that clip, I'm awkwardly deciding if I should give Gal Gadot a hug or not. And I just keep doing like this, and then she just hands me a sandwich or something. And then Lupita Nyong'o and Margot Robbie. It was wild. I don't think I'll ever forget that.
Nice. If there was a biopic on your life, who do you think would play you?
Who would play me? I'm not sure, because we're still limited, right?
I know.
So I think if it had to be done right now, among the choices we have of the A-listers, I think it would default to Randall Park, right? Because he's one of the few non-mixed guys, right?
Yeah.
Also, Randall kind of looks like my dad. I don't know him, but everybody that I know that knows him says he's really friendly and stuff.
All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you.
Here are our takeaways for today's episode. Number 1, if your gut tells you that a path is wrong for you, we're not saying you should listen to it, but you should at least examine what it's trying to tell you, because maybe it is wrong for you. Number 2, many shortcomings are fixable if you're able to leave your ego at the door. Number 3, it's not the milestones, but the everyday choices we make that define us in the end. Number 4, 2 people going through a shared event don't necessarily experience the same thing. Number 5, use your privilege for good. Number 6, it's important to call out racism, sexism, or any of the isms when you encounter them in your circles, because these are the people you have the most influence over. So if you want to change the world for the better, that's the place to start. Number 7, diversity has to go beyond what the eyes can see. We need diversity behind the cameras, in the writing rooms. When the entire creative team is diverse, that will translate in the story and finally give us nuanced, diverse, and accurate representation. Number 8, oppression is not a contest. So when we say Black Lives Matter, that doesn't mean that non-Black lives don't matter. Quick reminder, if you'd like to be invited to our online event at the end of the season, be sure to reach out to us. And also, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you're listening to right now. I'm your host, Lazu, and I'll see you next week for another nuanced conversation. I'm leaving you now with the song Worthy by Rod Kim and Marvelous She.
Girl, you're worthy. Boy, you're worthy. Tell him. Oh, Jay. Oh, Jay. You ain't gonna let it hang around. No way. Looking too good to be let down. Jealousy. Not your problem. They just mad they ain't me right now. Okay. Okay. Gonna hit play cause I like the sound. I see you. I am worth it. Worthy. And I deserve this. Worthy. I'm proven. Verified. Know that I am worthy. I am worth it. Worthy. Let's do this. Let's call people. Stepping out of my comfort zone. I won't need time. Spell it out for them. Cause I really know my N-N-O. Now I know. Not gonna happen. My attention is a gift and so thank you. Thank you. You don't gotta tell me, I already know.